The biting wind of late autumn seemed to mock Megan Walker, swirling around her threadbare coat and tugging at the thin scarf wrapped around Sophie's small neck. 6 years old, Sophie clutched a worn teddy bear, her eyes wide and solemn, as they watched the city lights flicker to life, indifferent to their plight. Another night, another cold bench in a park, another whispered promise that tomorrow would be different. Just a little longer, sweetie. Megan pulled her daughter closer, feeling Sophie burrow into her side, a tiny shivering bundle of trust. Her heart ached with a familiar searing pain. How had it come to this, a series of unfortunate events cascading into catastrophe? 10 years at the accounting firm ended with layoffs. Her husband Mark leaving for his younger coworker, and then Sophie's sudden illness draining what little savings remained. The safety net had vanished, leaving them tumbling into the abyss of homelessness. Every day was a battle for survival, a constant scramble for food, warmth, and some semblance of dignity. Megan had always been a fighter. She'd worked 2 jobs since 16, put herself through college, and dreamed of a stable life for her future family. Sophie had been that dream incarnate, a bright, curious child who deserved so much more than cold benches and the constant hum of fear. But lately the fight was draining her, leaving her hollowed out and weary. Her savings were gone, swallowed by emergency medical bills for Sophie's pneumonia, then by exorbitant fees at a temporary shelter that had ultimately proven too dangerous. Now all she had left was a single crumpled dollar bill in her pocket. It felt like a cruel joke, a mocking symbol of her utter destitution. What could a dollar buy in this sprawling, indifferent city, a cheap candy bar, a bus fare to nowhere? It certainly couldn't buy them a home. "Mommy, my toes are cold." Sophie's voice was small, barely audible above the distant traffic. Megan hugged her tighter, rubbing Sophie's tiny feet through her thin sneakers. "I know, baby. Just a little longer. I'm thinking of something special for us somewhere warm." She forced a smile, a practice mask she wore for Sophie, hoping her daughter couldn't see the despair lurking behind her eyes. The truth was, Megan had been clinging to a ridiculous fantasy, a whisper of an idea that had taken root in the darkest corners of her mind. It had started with a fleeting glance at a discarded newspaper, a crumpled page fluttering in the wind, catching her eye with a headline that seemed too absurd to be real: "Abandoned mansion yours for $1." She dismissed it, of course. A scam, a joke. But the image of the house, even in the grainy black and white photo, had stuck with her. A grand, if dilapidated structure with walls, a roof, a door that could lock out the cold, the fear of the world. It was a foolish, desperate hope, but hope was the only currency she had left. The next morning, the sun rose weak and watery, casting long shadows across the park. Sophie was still asleep, nestled against Megan, her breath soft and even. Megan watched her, a fierce protectiveness swelling in her chest. She couldn't give up, not when Sophie was depending on her. With a resolve born of desperation, Megan carefully extracted the dollar bill from her pocket. It was wrinkled soft from countless touches, but it was real. Her last dollar, and she was going to spend it. "Wake up, sleepyhead." Megan gently shook Sophie. "We're going on an adventure." An adventure. Sophie blinked, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "Yes, a very special one. We're going to find our new home." Megan's voice filled with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. The walk was arduous. The city slowly gave way to quieter streets, then to cracked pavements and overgrown yards. Houses here were older, some beautifully maintained, others crumbling like forgotten teeth in a decaying smile. Sophie grew tired, her small legs aching, but Megan carried her for stretches, her own muscles protesting with every step. Finally, they reached the street listed in the newspaper ad. It was lined with ancient oak trees, their bare branches reaching like skeletal fingers toward the gray sky. And then they saw it. Westwood Manor stood at the end of a long, winding driveway, partially hidden by overgrown bushes and trees. A mansion, or what was left of one. Its grandeur was undeniable, even in its decay. 3 stories tall, with a sweeping porch, tall arched windows, and a turret that seemed to pierce the clouds. But paint peeled from its wooden siding like sunburnt skin. Some windows were boarded up, others shattered, and the once manicured gardens were a riot of weeds and tangled vines. A single weathered sign hung crookedly from a rusty gate. "For sale, $1." "Mommy, is that a castle?" Sophie gasped, her eyes wide with wonder. Megan smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. Maybe, sweetie. Maybe it is. The newspaper had been a stroke of luck, or perhaps a desperate prayer answered in the most improbable way. Megan had been huddled on that park bench trying to shield Sophie from the biting wind when August had torn a page from a nearby overflowing bin, sending it skittering across the damp concrete. Normally, she wouldn't have paid it any mind, but something about the large, bold headline had snagged her attention. She'd snatched it up, her fingers numb with cold, and smoothed out the crumpled sheet. Below the headline was the blurry photograph of Westwood Manor, once magnificent, now clearly neglected. The accompanying text was brief, almost cryptic. Once magnificent, now awaiting a new owner. Due to unique circumstances and historical preservation requirements, property available for $1. Serious inquiries only. A phone number followed along with each address. Megan had scoffed. $1. It had to be a joke or a trap. Who sells a mansion for $1? There had to be a catch, a massive debt, a haunted past, a cursed lineage. Her rational mind, honed by years of navigating a harsh world, screamed caution. But her heart, weary from endless struggle, whispered of possibility. $1. It was all she had left, her last dwindling resource. She could buy a cheap coffee, maybe a small snack for Sophie, or she could invest it in this absurd, impossible dream. What did she have to lose? They already had nothing. Standing before the imposing structure, Megan took a deep breath and pulled out her battered cell phone, one of the last possessions she'd managed to hold on to, though the service was spotty, maintained through a minimal prepaid plan. She dialed the number from the advertisement with trembling fingers. A gruff voice answered after 3 rings. Thompson Property Management. Yes, hello. Megan's voice wavered slightly. I'm calling about the Westwood Manor advertisement. The one for $1. There was a pause, a sigh. Ah, another curious soul. Are you aware of the unique circumstances of the property? Ms. Walker. Megan Walker. I've read the advertisement, but no, I don't know the details. The property is available for a nominal fee of $1 as advertised. However, it comes with significant responsibilities. The house is in a severe state of disrepair. It requires extensive restoration, and there are strict historical covenants that must be adhered to. Furthermore, the property has been legally entangled for nearly a century. We've finally received court approval for this unusual sale, hoping to find someone willing to undertake its preservation. Megan's heart hammered against her ribs. I understand. Disrepair was obvious. Legal entanglement sounded ominous. But a home, a chance. Are you prepared to meet at the property today? Bring the dollar, and be prepared to sign a stack of documents as thick as your arm. Yes, Megan said without hesitation. I'll be there. How soon can you meet? 2 hours. Look for the black sedan. She hung up her hands, still shaking. She had committed. She had taken the plunge. Now all she had to do was get Sophie to the manor by the appointed time. Mommy, I'm hungry. Sophie's small voice brought Megan back to the present moment. Megan knelt beside her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know, sweetie. We'll find something soon. For now, let's explore the yard while we wait for Mr. Thompson. He's going to help us make this our new home. Sophie's face brightened. Really, we're going to live in the castle? We might, if everything goes well today. Megan squeezed her hand. But remember, it's going to need a lot of work. It's an old house that's been asleep for a long time. They wandered through the overgrown garden, Sophie's earlier fatigue forgotten as she skipped along the weed-choked paths, pointing out interesting stones and the occasional late autumn flower struggling through the tangle. Megan noted a collapsed gazebo, a dried-up fountain, and what must have once been a beautiful rose garden, now reduced to thorny skeletal bushes. Despite the decay, she could see the bones of something once magnificent, and perhaps with enough work, magnificent again. A sleek black sedan pulled up precisely 2 hours later. An elderly man emerged, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the rustic surroundings. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his eyes, though sharp, held a weariness that spoke of years spent dealing with legal complexities. Frank Thompson approached with measured steps, carrying a leather briefcase. Ms. Walker, he inquired, his voice formal and measured. Yes, Mr. Thompson. Megan stood straighter, suddenly conscious of her rumpled clothes and unwashed hair. This is my daughter, Sophie. Thompson's gaze flickered to Sophie, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. Pity, perhaps, or concern, before his professional mask slipped back into place. Shall we go inside? We have much to discuss. He led them through the overgrown front garden, the path barely visible beneath a carpet of fallen leaves. The front door, a heavy oak monstrosity, creaked open with a groan that seemed to echo the house's age. Thompson produced a large ring of keys, selecting an antique-looking brass key to unlock the door. Inside, the air was cold and stale, thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and forgotten memories. Weak light struggled to penetrate the grimy windows, casting dusty shafts onto the grand but decaying foyer. A sweeping staircase with an intricately carved banister spiraled upward into gloom. Dust sheets covered what looked like antique furniture, now mere ghostly shapes in the dim light. The house has been vacant, truly vacant, for nearly a century. Thompson's voice echoed in the vast space. No one has lived here since Victoria Lancaster disappeared in 1929. The utilities have been disconnected for decades. No running water, no electricity, and the heating system is well non-existent. The roof leaks in several places, and there are structural issues that will require significant investment. Megan nodded, taking it all in. It was worse than she'd imagined, yet somehow it didn't deter her. It was a challenge, yes, an enormous one, but it was their challenge, their chance. Victoria Lancaster. Megan echoed, curious despite the pressing, practical concerns. Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly. The last owner, her disappearance is part of the property's complicated history. The Lancaster family was prominent in this area in the early 1900s. When Victoria vanished without a trace, the property fell into legal limbo. There were no direct heirs, you see, and a dispute over ownership has dragged on for generations. What happened to her, Megan couldn't help asking. No one knows. Thompson's tone suggested this line of questioning was veering off topic. The historical details are in the documentation. For now, let's focus on the transfer of ownership, shall we? They moved into what appeared to be a formal parlor, where a small, portable table and two folding chairs had been set up. On the table lay a formidable stack of documents. Thompson gestured for Megan to sit while Sophie wandered around the room, peering curiously at the shrouded furniture. These are the transfer documents, the historical preservation covenants, and various waivers of liability. They outline your responsibilities as the new owner, the restrictions on demolition or significant alteration, and absolve the estate in the city of any responsibility for the condition of the property or any unforeseen issues. Megan listened intently as he summarized key clauses. She would be responsible for all repairs, all taxes, all future maintenance. She couldn't tear it down. She couldn't convert it into anything other than a residence. She had to preserve its historical integrity. It was a monumental undertaking designed, she suspected, to deter anyone who wasn't truly committed or truly desperate. And the dollar, Megan asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. Thompson produced a small, leather-bound ledger. Yes, the consideration, the symbolic transfer of ownership. He extended a hand. Megan reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the crumpled bill. It felt like the heaviest thing she had ever held. Her entire future, Sophie's future, resting on this single worn piece of paper. She smoothed it out, then placed it in Thompson's outstretched palm. He examined it, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. Thank you, Miss Walker. A historic transaction indeed. He carefully placed the dollar into a small velvet pouch produced from his inner jacket pocket, then meticulously recorded the transaction in his ledger. Then came the signing. Page after page, Megan's hand cramped as she scrolled her signature. Thompson witnessed each one, his expression unreadable. Finally, with a flourish, he pushed the last document toward her. The deed, Ms. Walker. Westwood Manor is officially yours. Megan stared at the document, her name printed clearly as the new owner. It was done. She owned a mansion, a dollar mansion. The absurdity of it warred with an overwhelming sense of relief and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Congratulations, Ms. Walker. Thompson rose, gathering his papers. I wish you the best of luck. You'll need it. He paused at the doorway, looking back at her with an inscrutable expression. This house, it has a way of holding on to its secrets. Perhaps you will be the one to finally uncover them. With that cryptic remark, he departed, leaving Megan and Sophie alone in the vast, silent, dust-filled mansion. The heavy oak door closed behind him with a resonant thud, plunging the foyer into deeper shadow. Megan looked at Sophie, who was gazing around with wide, curious eyes. Well, sweetie, she said, her voice echoing, slightly welcome home. It's very big, Mommy. Sophie's small voice seemed swallowed by the enormity of the space. It is, Megan agreed, a lump forming in her throat. And it's ours. The immediate reality crashed over her. No power, no water, no heat, just dust, decay, and vast echoing silence. But for the first time in a long time, they had walls around them, a roof over their heads, and a chance. The real adventure was just beginning. The silence of Westwood Manor was a living thing, a heavy blanket woven from decades of stillness and forgotten echoes. As dusk settled, deepening the shadows within the vast rooms, the silence pressed in on Megan and Sophie, amplifying every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind outside. It's quiet, Sophie observed, her small voice barely a murmur in the cavernous foyer. She clung to Megan's leg, her teddy bear clutched protectively against her chest. Very quiet, Megan agreed, trying to sound reassuring, while her stomach churned with a mixture of apprehension and strange, almost giddy disbelief. They were truly here in this enormous empty house. Their house. The first order of business was to find a place to sleep that wasn't too exposed to the elements. The grand parlor where they had signed the papers seemed the most sheltered. Megan had brought their meager belongings in a single backpack. A thin blanket, a few changes of clothes, some emergency rations of crackers, and a bottle of water. They spread the blanket on the dusty floor, a small island of warmth in the cold, vast room. As darkness fully descended, the mansion became a different entity. Without electricity, it was a black void swallowing light and sound. Megan had a small, battery-operated lantern, its beam cutting a narrow swath through the oppressive darkness. It cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the draped furniture seem like lurking monsters. Sophie, usually fearless, began to whimper. "Mommy, it's scary." Megan pulled her close, wrapping the blanket tightly around them both. "It's just a big old house, baby. It's not used to having people in it. That's all. We'll make it feel cozy soon." She hummed a lullaby, her voice a fragile comfort against the vastness. Sleep was a long time coming. Every rustle of leaves outside, every groan of old timbers sent a jolt of adrenaline through Megan. She imagined rats scurrying in the walls, bats flitting through the attic. The cold seeped into her bones despite their shared body heat beneath the thin blanket. She lay awake listening to Sophie's soft, even breathing, thinking about the enormity of the task ahead. How would she get water? How would she get power? How would she even begin to clean this place, let alone repair it? The dollar had bought them ownership, but it hadn't bought them resources. She was still just Megan, a single mom with nothing but determination and a 6-year-old daughter. The initial exhilaration of owning a mansion had given way to the daunting reality of its decay. Yet as the night wore on, a different feeling began to emerge. A sense of peace, however fragile. For the first time in months, they weren't exposed to strangers' gazes. They weren't vulnerable to the elements in the same way. They were inside. They had walls. They had a roof. It was a start, a very, very small start, but a start nonetheless. She thought of Victoria Lancaster, the vanished owner. What had this house been like when she lived here, filled with laughter music, the clinking of teacups, the rustle of silk gowns? It was hard to imagine looking at the dust and decay, but the house held stories. Megan was sure of it, and perhaps in uncovering its past, she might find a way to build their future. Just before dawn, exhaustion finally claimed her, and Megan drifted into a fitful sleep, Sophie still tucked securely in her arms. The first rays of sunlight, thin and hesitant, pierced through the grimy windows, painting dusty patterns on the floor. Sophie woke first, stretching like a kitten. "Mommy, it's morning," she chirped, her fear of the night seemingly forgotten in the light of day. Megan slowly sat up, her muscles stiff and aching. The cold was still pervasive, but the sunlight brought a measure of warmth and, more importantly, hope. "It is, sweetie, and you know what that means?" Megan's voice was raspy from the dusty air. Sophie's eyes widened expectantly. Exploring, Megan smiled. "Exactly. But first we need to find some water and something to eat." Their morning breakfast consisted of crackers and carefully rationed sips of water. Then, wrapped in their coats against the morning chill, they began a systematic exploration of the mansion. The kitchen was a vast empty space with a massive rusted stove and empty shelves. The dining room had a long, heavy table, still draped in a dust sheet like a sleeping giant. Upstairs, they found numerous bedrooms, each with a fireplace, some with ornate four-poster beds hidden beneath thick layers of dust. Sophie, no longer afraid, darted from room to room, her imagination taking flight. "This can be my princess room," she exclaimed in one particularly grand bedroom with a bay window. "And this can be your queen room, Mami." Megan followed a growing sense of wonder, replacing her initial trepidation. The house was enormous, overwhelming, but it also held a strange beauty. The intricate carvings on the fireplaces, the delicate patterns on the peeling wallpaper, the grand chandeliers draped in cobwebs. They spoke of a time of elegance and prosperity. In the overgrown backyard, they discovered an old well with a hand pump. With considerable effort, Megan managed to get it working, producing a trickle of rusty but ultimately clear water. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. They filled their water bottles suddenly rich with this basic necessity. Returning inside, they continued exploring. Megan kept an eye out for anything useful, anything that might help them make the house habitable. In one of the smaller, less grand rooms on the ground floor, tucked away behind the main staircase, she noticed something unusual. A section of the wall seemed slightly off the wallpaper, a different shade, a faint seam visible where there shouldn't be one. Before she could investigate further, a knock at the front door startled them both. Megan approached cautiously, Sophie hiding behind her. Who would be visiting them already? Thompson returning with some forgotten document? A curious neighbor or something more ominous? Through a crack in the curtain covering the door's window, she saw a middle-aged man standing on the porch. He was tall, solidly built with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face. He wore work clothes, sturdy jeans, a flannel shirt, and a worn leather jacket. Not threatening, but not immediately reassuring either. Megan opened the door part-way, keeping Sophie behind her. "Can I help you?" The man seemed equally cautious, his blue eyes appraising her. "Name's Jack Reynolds. I do carpentry and general contracting in the area." Noticed someone finally bought the old Lancaster place. He glanced past her into the foyer, then back at Megan with a hint of skepticism. "You planning on fixing it up?" "We're going to try," Megan said, lifting her chin, slightly defensive. Jack's gaze traveled over her worn clothes, then to Sophie peeking around her legs. His expression softened. "Look, I don't mean to intrude, but this place has been abandoned for nearly a century. It needs major work just to be safe, let alone comfortable." He hesitated. "You got a contractor lined up, a crew?" Megan felt heat rising to her face. "Not yet. We just moved in yesterday." Jack rubbed his jaw, seemingly debating with himself. "Mind if I take a look at that roof? There's a section over the east wing that's been concerning me for years. One good snow, and it could come down." "Years you've been watching this place." Megan's suspicion flared. Something flickered in Jack's eyes. Discomfort, perhaps? Or something deeper? "I live about a half-mile down the road. Been in the area my whole life. This house is, well, it's something of a local landmark. Hard not to notice it falling apart bit by bit." Megan hesitated, then stepped back. "I guess a professional opinion wouldn't hurt." Jack entered, his solid presence somehow making the vast foyer seem less overwhelming. He looked around, eyes narrowing at the peeling wallpaper, the water stains on the ceiling, the cracked plaster. "Bad, but not as bad as I expected. Structure's still basically sound." His gaze shifted to Sophie, who was watching him with open curiosity. "Hey there, little one. What's your name, Sophie?" Sophie stepped forward, apparently deciding Jack wasn't a threat. "Are you going to help fix our castle?" A smile cracked Jack's weathered face, transforming it entirely. "Castle, huh? Well, it sure looks like one. And yeah, I might be able to help with a few things." Over the next hour, Jack walked through the main areas of the house, pointing out critical issues. The leaking roof, the damaged plumbing, the ancient wiring that would need to be completely replaced. Megan followed her heart, sinking with each new problem, identified each one representing money she didn't have. Eventually, they ended up in the kitchen, where Jack is marrying the old wood stove. "This actually isn't bad. Could get it working with a bit of cleaning. Would give you heat, at least in this room, and a way to cook." Megan leaned against the counter, suddenly overwhelmed. "Why are you doing this? Helping strangers?" Jack was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the stove. "Not everyone around here is thrilled about this place being occupied again. Some folks think it should have been demolished years ago. Others?" He trailed off, then shook his head. "Let's just say there's history here and not all of it pleasant. But I've always thought this old house deserved a chance." His eyes met hers, direct and uncompromising. "Seems like maybe you do too." There was something he wasn't saying, but Megan was too exhausted to press. "I appreciate the help, Mr. Reynolds, but I should be honest. I can't afford to hire anyone right now. The house cost me my last dollar. Literally. Jack snorted a sound between amusement and disbelief. Yeah, I heard about that dollar sale. Town's been buzzing about it for weeks. He considered her for a long moment. Tell you what, I've got some spare materials from my last job. Roofing, tiles, lumber, that sort of thing, and my apprentice could use the experience on a historical property. We could patch the worst of the roof, maybe get that stove working. You just need to cover any additional materials. Why would you do that? Megan couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. Jack shrugged. Call it professional curiosity. Or maybe I just can't stand seeing a piece of history crumble when it doesn't have to. Either way, it's your call. Before Megan could respond, Sophie burst back into the kitchen, her eyes wide with excitement. Mommy, I found a picture of a lady who looks just like you. She thrust a dusty, framed photograph into Megan's hands. Wiping away layers of grime revealed a black and white portrait of a young woman in 1920s attire. A cloche hat, a drop-waist dress strand of pearls. Her face was partially shadowed, but there was something in the set of her jaw, the shape of her eyes, that was eerily familiar. That's Victoria Lancaster, Jack said quietly, peering over Megan's shoulder. The last owner before she vanished. He looked between the photo and Megan, a strange expression crossing his face. The resemblance is remarkable. Megan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the house's temperature. Who was she? What happened to her? Nobody knows for sure. She disappeared in the spring of 1929, just before the stock market crash. No signs of foul play, no ransom notes. She just vanished. Left everything behind, clothes, jewelry, personal papers. The house has been in legal limbo ever since. Sophie tugged at Megan's sleeve. She's pretty. She looks like a princess. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Jack tensed his hand, moving instinctively to his hip, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. The gesture wasn't lost on Megan. Expecting someone, Jack's voice had lost its casual tone, replaced by something sharper, more alert. Megan shook her head. They approached the front door together, Jack positioning himself slightly ahead of Megan and Sophie. The visitor was an elderly woman, perhaps in her 70s, plump and white-haired, with bright, inquisitive eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She clutched a covered dish in her gloved hands. Oh, the woman seemed startled to see Jack. Mr. Reynolds, I didn't realize you were acquainted with our new neighbors. Just offering some professional advice on the house, Mrs. Simmons. Jack's posture relaxed, but only slightly. This is Ms. Walker and her daughter, Martha Simmons. The woman's smile was warm as she extended the dish toward Megan. Just a simple casserole. Thought you might appreciate a hot meal on your first day. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when someone finally buys the old Lancaster place. That's incredibly kind of you. Megan accepted the dish, suddenly aware of how hungry they were. Please come in. As they settled in the parlor, the only room even remotely presentable, Martha Simmons proved to be a fountain of local knowledge, particularly about Westwood Manor. My grandmother was a maid here back when the Lancasters were in their heyday. Such stories she told balls in the grand ballroom, famous guests from New York and Boston, the finest china and silverware. The manor was the crown jewel of the county. What happened? Megan asked, watching Sophie devour the casserole with undisguised hunger. Martha's expression grew somber. The crash of '29 hit the Lancasters hard, like everyone. But it was Victoria's disappearance that truly ended the family's presence here. She was the last Lancaster you see. Her father had died the year before Mother, even earlier. No siblings. She was only 26 when she vanished. But surely she had other family who inherited the house, Megan pressed. That's the strange part, dear. There was no will and no clear heir. Victoria had never married. The estate fell into legal disputes. Martha lowered her voice, leaning forward conspiratorially. Some say she had hidden away a fortune in gold and jewels, anticipating the market collapse. There were rumors of secret rooms, hidden compartments. Fortune hunters and treasure seekers tried breaking in for years. Martha nodded toward Jack, who was standing by the window, seemingly absorbed in examining the rotting frame. Mr. Reynolds' grandfather was the last caretaker. Stayed on for decades, keeping the vandals out, maintaining what he could, until the money from the trust finally ran out in the '60s. Jack turned, his expression unreadable. My grandfather was loyal to the Lancaster family. He believed Victoria would return someday. Martha made a sympathetic noise. Such devotion. She turned back to Megan. The house has quite a reputation, you know. Some say it's haunted by Victoria's spirit. Others believe the house itself holds on to secrets, revealing them only to those it deems worthy. Her eyes twinkled clearly, enjoying the drama of it all. After finishing her portion of the casserole, Sophie had wandered to examine a large painting on the wall, a landscape of the manor in its prime, the gardens lush and well-tended. Martha finished her local history lesson and prepared to leave. As Jack helped her with her coat, she suddenly paused, drawing Megan aside and lowering her voice. "There's something you should know, dear." She glanced toward Jack, making sure he couldn't hear. "Be careful of James Blackwood. He's been trying to get his hands on this property for years. Claims his great-grandfather had some sort of business arrangement with Victoria's father that gives his family claim to the estate. He won't be happy that someone else has purchased it, especially for $1. "Who is James Blackwood?" Megan asked, a new worry settling in her stomach. "CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. Wealthiest man in the county, on the city council, fingers in every pie." Martha's lips thinned. "Not someone you want as an enemy. The courts finally ruled against his family's claim last year, which is why the property could be sold. But James Blackwood isn't a man who takes defeat gracefully." Her eyes softened with concern. "Just be watchful, dear." With that cryptic warning, Martha departed, leaving Megan with more questions than answers, in a growing sense that Westwood Manor was far more complicated than a simple fixer-upper. As dusk approached again, Jack helped Megan get the wood stove operational, clearing years of debris from the chimney and finding some relatively dry firewood in a shed behind the house. Soon a small but cheerful fire was crackling, providing their first real warmth since arriving. "I should get going," Jack said, wiping soot from his hands. "I'll be back tomorrow with some supplies for that roof. Weather report says rain in 3 days. We'll want to get the worst leaks patched before then." Megan watched him gathering his tools, conflicted. His help was invaluable, but his interest in the house remained mysterious. "Mr. Reynolds." "Jack, why are you really helping us?" Jack paused, his back to her. For a long moment he was silent, and Megan thought he might not answer. Then, without turning, "My grandfather made a promise to protect this house until the rightful owner returned. He passed that promise to my father, who passed it to me." His shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. "I've watched this place deteriorate for 20 years, waiting for someone who might actually care about it, not just see it as land to be developed or a treasure to be plundered." He turned then, his blue eyes intense. "Maybe you're that person, maybe you're not. But you're here now with your daughter, and you clearly need a home, much as this old house needs someone to care for it. So let's start there and see what happens." With that, he nodded a brusque goodbye and left the sound of his truck starting up outside strangely comforting in the gathering darkness. Megan and Sophie spent their second night at Westwood Manor in the kitchen, sleeping on the floor near the warm stove. The heat made an enormous difference, and both fell asleep more easily than the night before, exhausted from the day's events. In the middle of the night, Megan woke with a start. Sophie was sitting upright beside her, talking softly. "Yes, I like it here too. It's a big castle, just like in my books." Sophie's voice was clear, not the mumble of sleep talking. Megan propped herself up on one elbow. "Sophie, who are you talking to, sweetie?" Sophie turned, her face serene in the dying firelight. "Victoria. She says she's happy we're here. She's been waiting for a very long time." A chill ran through Megan that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "Sophie, honey, there's no one here but us. She's right there, Mommy." Sophie pointed to an empty corner of the kitchen. "She has a pretty dress like in the picture. She says this used to be her favorite room because the cook made the best cookies." Her smile faded slightly. "She says she's sad because someone took something that belongs to her." Megan sat up fully now, scanning the dark corners of the kitchen. The rational part of her brain insisted this was just a child's imagination fueled by an old house and talk of the missing Victoria. But something deeper, more primal, responded to the certainty in Sophie's voice. "What else does she say, Sophie?" "She wants us to find it. She says it's hidden, but we can find it if we look in the right place." Sophie yawned suddenly, the spell broken. "I'm tired, Mommy." Megan gathered her daughter close, heart racing. "Go back to sleep, sweetie. Everything's fine." She stroked Sophie's hair until the child's breathing deepened into sleep, while her own eyes remained fixed on the corner, seeing nothing but shadows. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Megan rekindled the fire in the stove, then used some of their precious water to wash their faces. She was reluctant to leave the relative warmth of the kitchen, but curiosity pulled her back to the odd section of wall she'd noticed yesterday. Sophie trailed behind her, still talking about Victoria and how she wanted them to find something important. Megan half listened, focused on examining the wall more closely. The seam was definitely there, a vertical line running from floor to ceiling, nearly invisible, except where the wallpaper pattern didn't quite match. She ran her fingers along the wall, feeling for any irregularity. Near the ceiling, her fingertips brushed against a small protrusion, a button cleverly disguised as part of the decorative molding. Mommy Victoria says to press it. Sophie was suddenly excited, bouncing on her toes. She says that's how you open the secret door. Megan hesitated, then pressed the button firmly. With a soft click, a section of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow, dark passageway. Sophie gasped, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. A secret passage, just like in the storybooks. Megan's heart hammered against her ribs. A primal instinct warned against venturing into unknown dark spaces, but curiosity, and the desperate hope that this hidden room might hold something useful, propelled her forward. "Stay close, Sophie," she whispered, switching on her small lantern. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for an adult, and slanted downward slightly. The walls were rough-hewn stone, suggesting it was an original part of the house's foundation. After a few steps, it opened into a small, square room. It was completely dark, without a single window, and the air was utterly still, as if no breath had disturbed it for decades. The lantern light revealed a scene frozen in time. In the center of the room stood a sturdy wooden desk, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. A high-backed chair was pushed neatly beneath it. Against one wall, a tall, narrow bookshelf was packed with leather-bound volumes. On the opposite wall, a large, ornate safe was built into the stone, its heavy iron door closed and secured with a complex dial. "It's like a secret library." Sophie breathed, her voice hushed with awe. Megan approached the desk, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out to brush away the dust. Beneath it, she saw a stack of paper, neatly tied with a faded ribbon. Beside them, a small, leather-bound journal lay open, its pages as yellowed with age. Carefully, Megan picked up the journal. The script was elegant, flowing clearly from a bygone era. The first page she could see had a date, October 12, 1928, and a name written at the top, Victoria Lancaster. A shiver ran down Megan's spine. This was her private sanctuary, her secret study. She opened the stack of papers. The top document was a formal letter addressed to Miss Victoria Lancaster. It was from a law firm dated early 1929. Megan's eyes scanned the elegant cursive, picking out key phrases: urgent matter regarding your inheritance, significant assets, recommend immediate action. Below that, there were more documents: old photographs, faded newspaper clippings, a hand-drawn map, and a series of meticulously kept ledgers. One photograph showed a beautiful young woman with striking eyes and a determined chin, dressed in elegant 1920s fashion. Victoria. The newspaper clippings were sensational, with headlines screaming, "Lancaster heiress vanishes," "Fortune in limbo," "Police stumped by disappearance." They detailed Victoria's sudden and unexplained disappearance from Westwood Manor in the spring of 1929, just before the stock market crash. There were no signs of foul play, no ransom notes, nothing. She had simply ceased to exist. Megan sat down in the dusty chair, pulling Sophie onto her lap. The weight of history pressed down on her. This wasn't just a story. It was Victoria's life frozen in time, and now Megan was holding pieces of it in her hands. She began to read the journal, starting from the beginning. Victoria's entries were vivid, intelligent, and often melancholic. She wrote of her privileged but lonely life, her stifling family expectations, her dreams of independence, and her growing unease with certain financial dealings her father was involved in. As Megan read, a narrative began to unfold. Victoria had discovered irregularities in her family's vast fortune, particularly concerning a large sum of gold bullion and other valuable assets that her father had secretly acquired and hidden, fearing a looming economic downturn. He had entrusted Victoria with the knowledge of its location, believing she was the only one he could truly trust. The journal entries became more urgent, more fearful over time. Victoria wrote of a greedy business associate of her father's, a man named Edwin Blackwood, who had become increasingly aggressive in trying to gain control of the Lancaster family's assets after her father's sudden death. Blackwood Victoria suspected knew about the hidden gold and was desperate to find it. Victoria feared for her life, believing Blackwood would stop at nothing. Then the journal abruptly ended on a chilling note, dated just days before her disappearance. Blackwood draws closer. I must secure the assets. If anything happens to me, the truth must be found. The map is with the ledgers. The key is hidden where the sun first touches the morning rose. Megan looked at the ledgers. They were filled with meticulous records of investments, properties, and indeed entries detailing large quantities of gold bullion. Tucked within the pages of the last ledger, just as Victoria had written, was a small, brittle piece of parchment. It was a crude but decipherable map of the mansion grounds, with a prominent X marked near what appeared to be a rose garden. And then the final, most astonishing discovery, tucked into the very last page of the journal, almost as an afterthought, was a small, folded piece of paper. It was a family tree meticulously drawn, tracing the Lancaster lineage. Megan's eyes followed the lines, her breath catching in her throat. Near the bottom of the tree was a name she recognized. Elizabeth Walker, her grandmother's name, connected by a dotted line to Victoria Lancaster with a note, daughter born November 1929, after disappearance. The lines continued. Elizabeth Walker had a daughter, Margaret Walker, Megan's mother, and then Megan herself, followed by Sophie. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just a random person who had bought an abandoned mansion for $1. She was Victoria's direct descendant, the heir, the rightful owner, not just of the house, but of whatever fortune Victoria had managed to secure. The safe, the hidden gold, the valuable assets. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was her family's legacy, and it was waiting for her to claim it. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Sophie's voice pulled her back to the present. "Are you crying?" Megan touched her cheek, surprised to find it wet. "No, sweetie, I'm just surprised." She looked at her daughter with new eyes, seeing the Lancaster features that had skipped her own generation. The same determined chin as Victoria, the same striking eyes. "It's a very special book. It tells us that this house really does belong to us in a way I never imagined. I told you Victoria was real," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "She's been waiting for us for a very long time." The safe drew Megan's attention again. A massive iron box built into the wall, promising more secrets, more confirmations. But it was locked, the combination unknown. Victoria's clue echoed in her mind. The key is hidden where the sun first touches the morning rose. She needed to find the rose garden shown on the map. She needed to be there at dawn to see where the first light touched. She needed to find the key. But most importantly, she needed to understand what this all meant for her and Sophie. Because if she truly was the rightful heir to the Lancaster fortune, then their luck had changed in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. And if James Blackwood was any relation to the man Victoria had feared, the man who might have been responsible for her disappearance, then they were potentially in very real danger. The secrets of Westwood Manor were only beginning to reveal themselves, and Megan had a feeling that the truth, whatever it was, would change their lives forever. Megan didn't leave the hidden study for hours, absorbing every word of Victoria's journal as if her life depended on it. In many ways, perhaps it did. The morning light had shifted to afternoon shadows by the time she finally emerged, mind racing with revelations. Sophie had fallen asleep on the small settee in the corner of the secret room, exhausted from the excitement. The family connection explained everything. Why Thompson had given her that strange look. Why the house had been sold for $1. Why Sophie seemed to have an uncanny connection to Victoria. The legal entanglement that had plagued the property for decades wasn't just a bureaucratic nightmare. It was a deliberate attempt to keep the Lancaster fortune from falling into the wrong hands until a true heir returned. Fate, destiny, coincidence. Whatever had drawn Megan to that discarded newspaper now seemed less random, more orchestrated by unseen hands across time. She gently woke Sophie, her daughter's sleepy eyes blinking up at her with innocent trust. "Did you finish the special book, Mommy?" Sophie rubbed her eyes, still half in dreams. Megan brushed the hair from her daughter's forehead, a new fierce protectiveness surging through her. "I did, sweetie. And do you know what I found out? We're special. This house has been waiting for us for a very long time." She gathered the most important documents, the journal, the map, the family tree, and carefully returned to the main house. The enormity of her discovery left her both exhilarated and terrified. If Victoria's account was accurate, There was a fortune hidden somewhere on the property. But the same forces that had driven Victoria into hiding might still be at work nearly a century later. The name Blackwood echoed in her mind. Martha Simmons' warning about James Blackwood took on new significance. Not just a wealthy local businessman with an interest in the property, but potentially the heir to a generations-long conspiracy that had begun with Victoria's disappearance. As the afternoon waned, Megan heard the rumble of a truck outside. Jack had returned as promised, the bed of his pickup loaded with roofing materials and tools. Through the grimy window, she watched him unload supplies with practiced efficiency. His movements were purposeful, almost military in their precision, not surprising given what he'd revealed about his family's connection to the house. She hesitated, unsure whether to share her discovery. Jack's grandfather had been the caretaker loyal to the Lancaster family. But how well did she really know Jack himself? Trust came hard after years of disappointments and betrayals. Megan stepped onto the porch, Victoria's journal hidden safely beneath a loose floorboard in what would become her bedroom. Sophie followed, already comfortable with Jack's presence. "You found it, didn't you?" Jack didn't look up from organizing roofing tiles. Victoria's study, the secret room. The directness of his question startled her. "How did you know?" Jack straightened, meeting her eyes with an intense gaze. "My grandfather showed my father. My father showed me. We've protected it for 3 generations, waiting for a Lancaster to return." He studied her face with new interest. "And now one has, though you didn't know it when you bought the place, did you? I just found out today." Victoria kept a journal. There was a family tree. "My grandmother was her daughter, born after she disappeared." Megan's voice faltered, still processing the revelation herself. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Wasn't my place. The house reveals its secrets to those it chooses when it chooses." Jack's expression softened slightly. "Besides, would you have believed me if I'd told you yesterday that you were Victoria Lancaster's great-granddaughter, that you'd somehow been drawn to buy this exact house?" He had a point. 24 hours ago, she would have dismissed such a claim as nonsense, the ramblings of a local eccentric. Now, with Victoria's handwritten confirmation of her lineage, the impossible had become undeniable reality. Jack resumed working, speaking over his shoulder. "Did you find anything about the key?" "The map. My grandmother's name was on the family tree. There was a map of the grounds marking something in what looks like a rose garden, and a clue about the key being where the sun first touches the morning rose." Megan watched his reaction carefully. Jack nodded as if confirming something long suspected. "The rose garden's mostly gone now, but the basic layout is still there. We should look at dawn tomorrow." He paused, his expression grave. "But there's something else you should know. The Blackwood family has been trying to get hold of this property for generations. The current James Blackwood is the great-grandson of Edwin Blackwood, Victoria's father's business partner, the man she suspected was behind her disappearance. Martha Simmons warned me about him yesterday." Megan felt cold despite the afternoon sun. "She mentioned he's been trying to buy the property." Jack's laugh held no humor. "Trying is an understatement. He's filed lawsuit after lawsuit claiming his great-grandfather had some sort of business arrangement that entitled him to a portion of the Lancaster estate. The courts finally dismissed his case last year, which is how the property could be sold. But James Blackwood isn't one to give up easily." Jack looked around the overgrown grounds, eyes narrowing. "He'll have heard about the sale by now. Won't take him long to find out who bought it." Megan thought of Sophie, of the secrets hidden within the house of the Blackwood fortune, apparently built on theft and possibly murder. Imagined eyes watching from beyond the trees. "What do we do?" Jack turned to her, jaw set with determination. "We find what Victoria hid, before Blackwood finds a way to take it, or the house, from you." That evening, Jack worked until dusk, repairing the worst section of roof. The physical labor seemed to come naturally to him, his movements revealing both strength and precision. Megan learned he'd been a Force Recon Marine before returning home to care for his ailing father. The carpentry business had started as a way to make ends meet, but had grown into something he genuinely enjoyed, bringing old things back to life, he called it. Inside, Megan prepared a simple dinner from supplies Jack had brought, cooking on the now functional wood stove. Sophie chatted animatedly about Princess Victoria and her secret treasure, mixing reality and fantasy in the way only children can. The casual domesticity felt strange after months of homeless uncertainty, yet somehow right. as if the house itself was embracing them, welcoming them home. After Sophie had fallen asleep near the stove, Jack and Megan spread the map on the kitchen table, comparing it to a modern survey of the property Jack had brought. The old rose garden lay at the eastern edge of the grounds, where the morning sun would first strike. Several structures marked on Victoria's map no longer existed. A gazebo, a greenhouse, a small ornamental bridge over what must have once been a decorative pond. Jack traced the path they would take at dawn. We should be there before sunrise to get our bearings. The garden's completely overgrown now, but the basic layout is still visible if you know what to look for. He pointed to the X on Victoria's map. This location would have been the centerpiece of the garden, probably a particularly prized rose bush or a statue. Megan studied the two maps, noting how the pristine geometric patterns of Victoria's garden had dissolved into wilderness over decades of neglect. How do we even begin to find something so specific in all that overgrowth? Jack's eyes crinkled slightly. That's why we go at dawn. We'll see exactly where the first sunlight touches, just as Victoria described. The garden may have changed, but the sun's path hasn't. As Jack prepared to leave for the night, Megan fought against an irrational fear of being alone in the vast house. Jack seemed to sense her unease, hesitating at the door. I could sleep in my truck if it would make you feel safer. His offer was casual, but his eyes were watchful. Megan shook her head, summoning determination. We'll be fine. You've already done more than enough. He nodded, respecting her independence. I'll be here before dawn. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow could change everything. After he left, Megan checked all the doors and windows Jack had helped secure, then settled beside Sophie near the stove's dying embers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Victoria's journal entries played through her mind. The fear, the desperation, the determination to protect her family's legacy from Edwin Blackwood's grasping hands. How much had Victoria known about her pregnancy when she disappeared? Had she fled to protect her unborn child as well as the Lancaster fortune? Megan wondered about her grandmother, Elizabeth raised, never knowing her mother or her true heritage. The thought of such sacrifice twisted something deep in Megan's heart. Shortly before dawn, Jack's quiet knock startled Megan from a light doze. She opened the door to find him holding a thermos of coffee and a small bag of pastries from the local bakery. The simple kindness nearly undid her. When was the last time anyone had done something thoughtful for her without expectation? They ate quickly, Sophie still sleeping peacefully wrapped in blankets near the stove. Megan left a note explaining where she'd gone, though she expected to return before her daughter woke. The pre-dawn air was bitingly cold as they made their way across the overgrown grounds, Jack leading with a flashlight, Megan following close behind. The rose garden, once the pride of Westwood Manor, had devolved into a tangle of briars and wild growth. Jack pointed out the faint remnants of the original pathways, now little more than subtle indentations in the earth. At the center, as his map had indicated, stood what must have once been a showcase rosebush. Larger and older than the others, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like arthritic fingers. So now we wait, Megan breathed, watching the eastern horizon lighten almost imperceptibly. The world held its breath in that liminal space between night and dawn. Jack positioned himself at the garden's edge, studying the angle of the coming sunrise. The bush looks to be in the right position, but we need to see exactly where the first light falls. As they waited in silence, Megan felt a strange connection to Victoria. Standing perhaps in this very spot nearly a century earlier, hiding her fortune as dawn broke, knowing she might never return. Had she been afraid? Determined. Had she known her actions would ripple through generations to this moment? The first ray of sunlight crested the horizon, a golden spear piercing the darkness. Jack and Megan watched intently as it touched the ancient rosebush, illuminating one particular section where a single withered branch extended eastward. There, Jack pointed to where the light struck. That's our spot. Megan knelt beside the illuminated branch, examining the ground beneath it. The earth was hard resistant after the recent cold snap, but determination lent strength to her fingers as she began to dig. Jack produced a small garden trowel from his pocket, wordlessly handing it to her. This was her discovery to make. The trowel struck something solid about 8 inches down. Megan's heart raced as she carefully cleared away the surrounding soil, revealing a small, tarnished silver box intricately engraved with a pattern of roses and vines. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, feeling the weight of history in her palms. The box was sealed tight, its hinges corroded by decades underground. Jack offered his pocket knife, and Megan carefully worked the blade around the seam until the lid finally creaked open. Inside, nestled on a faded velvet lining, lay a single ornate brass key, heavy, cold, and unmistakably old. Victoria's key to the safe. Megan stared at it, overwhelmed by the tangible connection to her great-grandmother. All these years, through wars and depressions and changing fashions, it had waited here exactly where Victoria had placed it for someone who would understand its significance. Jack's voice was quiet, respectful of the moment. Let's get back to the house before someone sees us. The walk back felt dreamlike, the key a solid weight in Megan's pocket. As they approached the manor, however, the dream shattered. A sleek black luxury car was parked in the driveway, its polished surface incongruous against the dilapidated backdrop. A tall man in an expensive suit stood on the porch, knocking imperiously on the front door. James Blackwood. Jack's voice hardened, his posture subtly shifting to something more alert, more dangerous. He's looking for you. Or Sophie. Megan's blood ran cold. Sophie was alone inside. Jack touched her arm lightly. Go around back. Get to Sophie. I'll handle Blackwood. His eyes conveyed what his words didn't. Trust me. Heart pounding, Megan circled behind the house, slipping in through the kitchen door, while Jack approached the front porch. Through a window, she watched their interaction. Jack's casual stance, belying the tension visible in his shoulders, Blackwood's imperial bearing, as he looked down his nose at the carpenter. Sophie was still asleep, undisturbed by the knocking. Megan breathed a sigh of relief, then positioned herself to hear the conversation outside. Blackwood's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. I'm looking for the new owner of this property. I understand it was recently sold. Jack blocked the doorway, arms crossed. The owner's not available right now. I'm handling the renovations. Perhaps you could tell me how to reach them. I have a business proposition that would be quite advantageous. Blackwood's tone was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man accustomed to getting his way. I'll pass along your message. Jack remained immovable. And your name would be... A flicker of annoyance crossed Blackwood's face. James Blackwood. I'm sure they'll recognize it. My family has a long-standing interest in this property. I'll bet they do. Jack's tone remained neutral, but Megan could see the tension in his stance. Blackwood surveyed the dilapidated mansion with poorly disguised contempt. This place requires extensive work to be habitable. My offer would save the new owner considerable expense and trouble. He produced a business card, holding it out to Jack. Please have them contact me at their earliest convenience. Jack took the card without looking at it. Anything else? Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just curiosity. What kind of person buys a place like this for $1? The kind who recognizes its true value beyond the price tag. Jack's response was measured, careful. Blackwood laughed, a sound without warmth. Well said. Though I wonder if they truly understand what they purchased and all that comes with it. His gaze swept across the facade, once more lingering on certain windows, as if he knew exactly what lay behind them. This house has a complicated history after all. Most old houses do. Jack remained impassive. Indeed. Blackwood turned to leave, then paused. You know, it's interesting. I've seen photographs of Victoria Lancaster, the last owner. The resemblance to the woman I glimpsed through the window yesterday is remarkable. Megan froze. He had seen her, had been watching the house. Jack's voice hardened. I'll pass along your message, Mr. Blackwood. Please do. Blackwood nodded cordially, but his eyes were calculating. And do convey that my patience, while considerable, is not infinite. This property rightfully belongs to the Blackwood family. One way or another, it will return to us. He departed with measured steps, the luxury car purring to life beneath him. Jack watched until the vehicle disappeared down the long driveway before returning to the kitchen, his expression grim. He's seen you. He's making connections already. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. We need to open that safe. Megan's hands trembled slightly as she produced the key. What if it doesn't work? What if it's the wrong key, or the safe mechanism has corroded, or Jack's hand covered hers steady and warm? One problem at a time. Victoria was meticulous. If she left this key, it's the right one. Sophie stirred, then rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mommy, did you find the special thing Victoria talked about? Megan nodded, showing Sophie the ornate key. We did, sweetie. Now we need to see what it opens. The three made their way to the secret study, Sophie skipping ahead as if she'd known the hidden passage her entire life. The safe loomed in the wall, its iron face impassive, challenging. Megan approached it slowly, key in hand, feeling the weight of the moment. The keyhole was partially obscured by decades of dust and cobwebs. Jack carefully cleared it, then stepped back. "This is your history, Megan. Your legacy." The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, turning with a solid, satisfying click. Megan then manipulated the dial, following a sequence of numbers she'd found scribbled on a note within Victoria's journal, a date significant to the Lancaster family. With a final heavy thunk, the massive iron door swung open. It wasn't a glittering pile of gold coins, not exactly. Instead, the safe was filled with meticulously organized boxes and leather pouches. Megan pulled out the first pouch. It was heavy, and when she opened it, she gasped. Inside were dozens of gleaming gold coins, old and weighty, glinting in the lantern light. Beyond the coins, there were stacks of crisp old banknotes, bundles of what appeared to be stock certificates and bonds, in a small, velvet-lined box containing exquisite antique jewelry, sparkling diamonds, deep red rubies, and emeralds that seemed to glow from within. There were also deeds to several properties, some in the city, some in the countryside, all bearing the Lancaster name. The sheer volume of wealth was staggering. This wasn't just enough to fix the mansion. It was enough to change their lives fundamentally and irrevocably. "Wow, Mommy, we're rich." Sophie's innocent assessment broke the spell, causing both adults to laugh despite the tension. Jack carefully examined one of the gold coins. These are pre-1929 double eagles. Each one is worth far more than its face value now. Probably 15,000 to 20,000 apiece to collectors. Megan's mind reeled at the calculation. There were at least 50 coins in just the first pouch, and several similar pouches remained in the safe. Add to that the jewelry, the securities, the other properties. Victoria had not only foreseen the economic collapse, she had acted decisively, converting her family's liquid assets into tangible, portable wealth that had survived the decades hidden away in this forgotten room. Jack's expression was somber, despite the treasure before them. "Blackwood can't know about this. Not yet. Not until we've secured your legal claim to everything." Megan sank onto the dusty chair, overwhelmed by the implications. "I never expected any of this." She gestured to the wealth spread before them. "A week ago, I was homeless, desperate, with $1 to my name. Now I'm sitting in my family's secret room, surrounded by what must be millions of dollars in gold and antiquities." Jack's response was gentle but firm. "Money solves some problems and creates others. Blackwood wanted this property before he knew about you. Now that he's seen you noticed your resemblance to Victoria, his interest will only intensify." Sophie, oblivious to the adults' concerns, was carefully arranging some of the gold coins and patterns on the desk, treating them like play objects rather than a fortune. Megan watched her daughter, the Lancaster features unmistakable now that she knew to look for them, features James Blackwood had apparently recognized as well. "What do we do now?" Megan's question encompassed everything. The house, the fortune, Blackwood's thinly veiled threats. Jack considered carefully before answering. "We need legal help. Someone who specializes in estate law and historical property disputes. Someone not connected to Blackwood's circle of influence. The local library might have newspapers on microfilm," Megan suggested, her mind working through practical steps. "Articles about Victoria's disappearance, maybe legal notices about the estate. And I should try to find records of my grandmother's birth, something to prove the connection." Jack nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. I know the area, the local record keepers. I can help navigate that part. But we should move some of this wealth somewhere safer in the meantime. Blackwood's not above breaking in if he suspects what's here." Megan began carefully repacking the items, her mind racing. "We can't keep this in a bank. We don't have proof of ownership yet." "No, but we can hide it somewhere else in the house. Somewhere even more secure than this room, which Blackwood or his associates might already know about." Jack's eyes met hers. Did Victoria mention any other hiding places in her journal? Megan thought back through the pages she'd read. Not specifically, but she did write about how her mother had taught her to always have a second hiding place for truly precious items. The mother's sitting room was mentioned several times as a favorite retreat. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jack continued repairs on the roof and essential structural elements, while Megan divided her time between caring for Sophie, studying Victoria's journal for further clues, and researching at the local library. The town's historical society proved especially valuable, providing access to newspaper archives dating back to the 1920s. The articles about Victoria's disappearance painted a sensational picture. "Lancaster heiress vanishes without a trace," screamed one headline from May 1929. The piece detailed how Victoria had last been seen by the household staff on a Tuesday evening, appearing normal and giving no indication of travel plans. By Wednesday morning, she was gone. Her bed unslept and no note left behind, no luggage taken. Police had found no signs of forced entry or struggle. Victoria's automobile remained in the garage. Her passport was still in her desk drawer. The prevailing theory had been kidnapping, but no ransom demand ever came. A follow-up article from 2 weeks later mentioned Edwin Blackwood, describing him as the late Mr. Lancaster's business partner, who was assisting police with their inquiries. The piece noted Blackwood's statement that Victoria had been increasingly unstable following her father's death, suggesting she might have taken her own life. Megan's blood ran cold reading the deliberate character assassination. Victoria's journal had shown her to be clear-headed, rational, and justifiably fearful, not unstable or suicidal. More research uncovered a small notice in the county records from December 1929 listing the birth of female infant Lancaster Sterling to Mother Victoria Lancaster missing, Father Thomas Sterling deceased. The baby had been placed with paternal Aunt Margaret Sterling Walker. This matched family stories Megan had heard growing up, that her grandmother Elizabeth had been orphaned as an infant and raised by a great-aunt. The pieces fit together perfectly, confirming Victoria's pregnancy at the time of her disappearance. Between research sessions, Megan explored the house methodically, looking for Victoria's mother's sitting room. She found it on the second floor, a smaller, more intimate parlor overlooking what had been the rose garden. The room had a beautiful but disused stone fireplace. Remembering Victoria's journal entry about a secondary hiding place, Megan examined the fireplace carefully. The hearth was made of large, rough-hewn stone slabs that appeared solid. She tapped them, listened for hollow spaces, ran her fingers along the edges, looking for irregularities. Just as frustration began to set in, her fingers brushed against a faint indentation, a hairline crack that ran along the grout line of one of the larger stones. It was barely visible, camouflaged by years of dust and grime. With a small pry bar Jack had left for her, Megan carefully began to apply pressure. The stone resisted, but with persistent, gentle force, it finally gave way with a soft grating sound. It wasn't a single stone, but a section of the hearth designed to pivot outwards. Behind it, in a small dark cavity, lay a wooden box. It was plain, unadorned, and surprisingly light. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded silk, were what Victoria had clearly deemed her most precious possessions. Not gold bullion, but items of profound historical and sentimental significance. A collection of rare first-edition books, some signed by famous authors of the era. A small, intricately carved locket containing a miniature portrait of a young woman who resembled Victoria, perhaps her mother, and a small leather pouch filled with large, uncut diamonds, their facets catching the dim light with dazzling brilliance. These were the family heirlooms, the irreplaceable treasures Victoria had deemed worthy of the deepest concealment. The diamonds alone were worth a fortune, far exceeding the value of the gold coins. Megan carefully closed the box, her mind reeling with the responsibility now resting on her shoulders. That evening, as Jack finished installing a generator that would provide basic electricity to key areas of the house, Megan shared her discoveries, both from the research and the second hiding place. "This changes everything," Jack observed, carefully examining the birth record photocopies. "You have documented proof of your connection to Victoria. With this and the family tree from her journal, a good lawyer could establish your claim beyond question." But what about Blackwood? Megan had noticed an unmarked car parked down the road earlier that day, its occupant watching the house through binoculars. The surveillance was becoming bolder, more obvious. Jack's expression hardened. "We need to move quickly. With your permission, I'd like to contact William Carson. He's a lawyer in the city who specializes in historical property claims. His grandfather was the attorney who tried to help Victoria before she disappeared." Megan agreed immediately, trusting Jack's judgment. While Jack made the call from his truck, Megan decided to move the most valuable items from the safe to the second hiding place beneath the hearth. The space was smaller, but more secure and unknown to anyone except her and Victoria. She was midway through this process, carefully transferring gold and jewelry to a canvas bag, when Sophie appeared in the doorway of the secret study. "Mommy, there's a big black car coming up the driveway." Sophie's voice was small, worried. Megan's heart raced. "Stay here, sweetie. Don't make a sound." She quickly closed the safe, not bothering with the lock, and hurried to the front of the house. Through the window, she saw the same luxury car that had brought James Blackwood days earlier, now rolling to a stop before the porch. Jack was nowhere in sight, still in his truck at the far end of the property making his call. Megan was alone. Blackwood emerged from the car, immaculately dressed as before, his silver-streaked dark hair perfectly styled. He approached the door with the confidence of someone who believed he already owned the place, his knock more a formality than a request. Megan took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door. "Miss Walker, I presume." Blackwood's smile was practiced professional, but his eyes were calculating, taking in every detail of her appearance. "I'm James Blackwood. I stopped by earlier this week, but only met your handyman." The contempt with which he said the word was subtle but unmistakable. Megan forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwood, what can I do for you? I understand congratulations are in order. Purchasing Westwood Manor is quite an unexpected achievement for someone in your circumstances." His gaze drifted past her, surveying the foyer with the air of someone assessing a property they intended to acquire. The implications stung, but Megan kept her expression neutral. "I appreciate the sentiment, but I'm quite busy with renovations. Perhaps you could tell me why you're here." Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Direct and to the point, a quality I admire." He reached into his jacket, producing a folded document. "I'm prepared to offer you a very generous sum for this property, 50 times what you paid for it." Megan didn't reach for the paper. "You're offering me $50 for a historical mansion." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "I'm offering you $100,000 for a derelict property that will cost millions to restore properly. A property with complicated legal entanglements that someone in your position is hardly equipped to navigate." The condescension in his tone made Megan's temper flare. "I'm not interested in selling, Mr. Blackwood. The house isn't on the market. Everyone has a price, Ms. Walker." Blackwood's voice hardened slightly. "This offer is time-sensitive and exceptionally generous considering the circumstances. I encourage you to think practically about your situation and your daughter's future." The mention of Sophie sent a chill down Megan's spine. How did he know about Sophie? Had he been watching them that closely? "My answer is no. Thank you for your interest, but as I said, I'm quite busy." Megan began to close the door. Blackwood's hand shot out, catching the edge of the door. "You misunderstand me, Ms. Walker." His voice dropped lower, all pretense of cordiality vanishing. "This house and everything connected to it rightfully belongs to the Blackwood family. Your claim, whatever you believe it to be, won't stand against our resources." For a moment, his mask slipped completely, revealing something cold and predatory beneath. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the mask was back in place, his smile returning, though it never reached his eyes. "This house has a complicated history, Miss Walker. A dangerous history. People have disappeared from within these walls." He studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. "The resemblance truly is uncanny, you know. Almost as if Victoria Lancaster herself had returned." Megan's blood ran cold, but she held her ground. "I'm not selling the house, Mr. Blackwood. Not for $50, not for $100,000. Now please remove your hand from my door." For a tense moment, he didn't move. Then slowly he withdrew his hand, straightening his already immaculate suit. "I'll be in touch. Ms. Walker, this isn't finished. In fact, it's barely begun." He turned and walked back to his car with measured steps, never looking back. As the vehicle pulled away, Jack's truck came barreling up the driveway, gravel spraying beneath the tires. He jumped out, eyes scanning for danger. "Was that Blackwood? What happened?" Jack's voice was tight with concern. Megan's hands trembled now that the confrontation was over. "He offered to buy the house. When I refused, he essentially threatened me. And Jack, he knows about Victoria, about my resemblance to her. He's been watching us far more closely than we realized." Jack's expression darkened. "We need to move quickly. William Carson can see us tomorrow morning. He can help establish your legal claim and file for protective orders if necessary." That night, after Sophie was asleep, Megan finished moving the most valuable items to the second hiding place beneath the hearth. She left a small portion of the gold and some papers in the main safe, enough to look substantial if someone forced it open, but not the true bulk of the fortune. The act of moving the treasure, of physically securing it in a new secret place, filled her with a strange sense of connection to Victoria. She wasn't just inheriting her great-grandmother's wealth. She was inheriting her struggle, her defiance against the Blackwood family's relentless pursuit. As Megan closed the hidden compartment in the hearth, fitting the stone section carefully back into place, she whispered a promise. To Victoria, to Sophie, to herself. This house, this legacy would not fall into Blackwood hands. Not after a century of waiting. Not after finally finding its way home. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating space filled with hushed whispers and the rustle of legal papers. Megan sat beside William Carson, her heart pounding against her ribs. Sophie was safely with Jack, who had volunteered to watch her, ensuring the child was spared the tension of the proceedings. Across the aisle, James Blackwood sat with his legal team, his expression a mask of arrogant confidence. He glanced at Megan, a sneer playing on his lips, as if already savoring his victory. William Carson had proven to be everything Jack promised, a seasoned attorney with shrewd eyes and an air of quiet authority. In his 70s, Carson retained the sharp intellect and tenacity that had made him legendary in historical property disputes. When Megan had shown him Victoria's journal, the family tree, and the birth records of her grandmother, Carson's eyes had lit with the thrill of a complex legal puzzle. Blackwood had moved quickly after his confrontation with Megan, filing an emergency injunction to freeze all assets connected to Westwood Manor, claiming they were disputed property based on a century-old business agreement between Edwin Blackwood and Victoria's father. If granted, the injunction would cut off Megan's access to the very resources she needed to fight her case and make the mansion habitable. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s named Helen Rivera, entered the courtroom. All rose, the atmosphere tightening with anticipation. Judge Rivera was known for her no-nonsense approach and meticulous attention to legal precedent. She would not be swayed by Blackwood's wealth or influence, but neither would she be moved by Megan's sympathetic circumstances without solid legal grounds. Blackwood's lead attorney presented their case first, his voice smooth with practiced confidence. The Lancaster estate, he argued, had been entangled with Blackwood business interests since the 1920s. He produced yellow documents showing financial transactions between Richard Lancaster and Edwin Blackwood, painting a picture of a partnership that entitled the Blackwood family to a significant portion of the Lancaster assets. Megan's stomach twisted as the attorney dramatically described her as an opportunistic drifter who had fabricated a fantastical story of lineage to claim a valuable property. He dismissed Victoria's journal as unverifiable hearsay, possibly even a clever forgery. The birth records were circumstantial at best. When it was William Carson's turn, he rose unhurriedly, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the theatrical presentation from Blackwood's team. His voice, though aged, carried clearly through the courtroom as he systematically dismantled their arguments. The original deed of sale, Carson explained, was legally sound and had been explicitly approved by the court after decades of the Blackwood family failing to prove their claim. The dollar price was irrelevant, a symbolic consideration that satisfied legal requirements. Next, he addressed Megan's lineage, presenting the church baptismal record of Eleanor Walker, born Lancaster Sterling, Victoria's daughter. The document clearly named Victoria as the mother, with a note that the child had been born after her disappearance. The subsequent birth and marriage records created an unbroken chain from Eleanor to Megan. Carson then presented Victoria's journal not as proof in itself, but as supporting context that aligned perfectly with the documented facts. This was not a random drifter stumbling upon a valuable property, he argued, but a direct descendant reclaiming her rightful inheritance after nearly a century. The most damning evidence came last. The sworn affidavit Victoria had filed with Carson's grandfather's law firm just weeks before her disappearance. In it, Victoria had detailed her fears of Edwin Blackwood, the existence of the hidden assets, and her explicit wishes for her inheritance. As the judge read the affidavit, the courtroom fell silent. James Blackwood's composed facade cracked momentarily, a flash of rage crossing his features before he controlled it. He leaned forward, whispering furiously to his legal team. During the recess, Blackwood approached Megan and Carson in the hallway, his eyes burning with barely contained fury. This is a farce. That journal, that affidavit, they're obvious forgeries. You're a liar, Ms. Walker, and you'll pay for this charade. His voice remained low, but the venom was unmistakable. Carson stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Megan and Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, I advise you to calm yourself. The evidence is clear. Clear, Blackwood scoffed, color rising in his face. You think a few old papers can overturn a century of my family's rightful claim? My great-grandfather knew about that gold. He was cheated out of his share. Your great-grandfather was a predator, Mr. Blackwood. Megan found her voice surprising herself with its steadiness. And Victoria Lancaster was a survivor. This isn't about cheating, it's about justice. And you won't win. Blackwood's gaze bored into her naked hatred, replacing his usual calculated expression. We'll see about that. He stalked back to his table, muttering furiously to his attorneys. The recess ended, and the courtroom fell silent as Judge Rivera returned, her expression inscrutable as she reviewed her notes. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, including the original deed of sale, the historical church records confirming Ms. Walker's lineage, and the compelling corroborated testimony of Victoria Lancaster's journal and affidavit, this court finds in favor of the respondent, Ms. Megan Walker. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Blackwood's face contorted as if he'd been physically struck. The motion for an emergency injunction is hereby denied. Judge Rivera continued, her voice firm and measured. Furthermore, the court finds no merit in the Blackwood family's long-standing claim to Westwood Manor or the assets contained within. Ms. Megan Walker is the legal and rightful owner of Westwood Manor and all its possessions and contents, including the assets inherited from Victoria Lancaster. She paused, looking directly at Blackwood. I strongly advise the Blackwood family to cease all further legal actions regarding this property. Any future frivolous litigation will be met with severe sanctions. The gavel struck, sharp and final. Case dismissed. A wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled her knees washed over Megan. Carson squeezed her arm, a rare smile gracing his lips. We won, Ms. Walker. We truly won. Across the courtroom, Blackwood sat slumped in his chair, his legal team already gathering their papers in defeated haste. For a moment his eyes met Megan's, and the hatred she saw there, they sent a chill down her spine. The battle was over, but the war she suspected had only just begun. Outside the courthouse, Carson provided a brief statement to the local press, who had gathered, drawn by the decades-long drama of the Lancaster-Blackwood dispute. Megan declined to speak, eager to return to Sophie and share the good news. She had defended her family's legacy, established her legal claim, and secured their future. But until she was back with Sophie, the victory wouldn't feel complete. Jack and Sophie were waiting at Westwood Manor, the little girl drawing pictures at the kitchen table while Jack prepared lunch on the wood stove. The sight of such domestic normality after the tension of the courtroom brought unexpected tears to Megan's eyes. We won, Sophie. The judge said the house is really ours. Megan gathered her daughter into a tight embrace, Sophie's small arms wrapping around her neck. Jack's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that transformed his weathered features entirely. That's wonderful news. I knew Carson wouldn't let you down. That evening, as Sophie slept peacefully in what was now officially her room, recently furnished with a proper bed and colorful blankets that had purchased with some of the gold coins, Megan and Jack sat on the porch, sharing a bottle of wine Carson had given them to celebrate. So what happens now? Jack's question hung in the cool evening air, encompassing far more than just the legal victory. Megan gazed at the overgrown grounds, mentally cataloging the work ahead. Now we rebuild. Make this place a home again. The judge's ruling gives me access to Victoria's assets. I can hire proper contractors, get the electricity and plumbing fully operational. Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. And Blackwood. The memory of Blackwood's hateful glare tempered Megan's jubilation. He won't give up easily. The judge's warning might keep him from filing more lawsuits, but there are other ways he could make trouble. We'll be vigilant. Jack assured her, his military training evident in his assessment. I've installed basic security, motion sensors, better locks. I'll stay on the property for now. Keep watch at night. You don't have to do that. Megan felt a surge of gratitude mixed with something deeper, more complicated. I know I don't have to. I want to. Jack's eyes met hers, steady and certain. My family has protected this house for 3 generations. I'm not abandoning that duty now, especially when there's finally a Lancaster back where she belongs. The weeks that followed saw Westwood Manor undergo a remarkable transformation. With the legal hurdles cleared, Megan began the process of converting some of Victoria's gold and securities into usable funds. William Carson connected her with reputable dealers who didn't ask uncomfortable questions about the sudden appearance of pre-Depression era gold coins. With financial resources no longer a constraint, Megan hired a team of contractors, carefully vetted by Jack for any connections to Blackwood, to tackle the major repairs. The roof was completely replaced, its new slate shingles gleaming in the sunlight. Modern plumbing and electrical systems were installed, bringing running water and reliable power to every corner of the vast structure. Jack oversaw the work, his knowledge of historical restoration proving invaluable. The workers respected his expertise and attention to detail, while Megan focused on the interior design aspects, selecting period-appropriate wallpapers, paint colors, and fixtures that honored the house's heritage, while creating a comfortable home for herself and Sophie. Sophie thrived in this new environment. With proper heating and a stable roof over her head, her frequent colds disappeared. She attended the local elementary school, quickly making friends and bringing them home for playdates in the increasingly hospitable mansion. Her conversations with Victoria grew less frequent, though she occasionally mentioned that the lady in the painting was happy with how they were fixing the house. The grand staircase, its banister intricately carved, was painstakingly restored, the dark wood polished to a rich sheen. The formal parlor, once dusty and neglected, became a comfortable living room with carefully chosen furniture that respected the historical aesthetic while providing modern comfort. Through it all, Megan kept Victoria's journal close, often reading passages in the evening, feeling a profound connection to this great-grandmother she had never known. Victoria's strength, her foresight, her determination to protect her family's legacy, these qualities resonated deeply with Megan, inspiring her own resolve to honor that legacy properly. The renovation of the secret study was a special project undertaken by Megan and Jack alone. They carefully preserved it exactly as Victoria had left it, only cleaning and stabilizing the fragile elements. The desk, the bookshelves, even the safe remained untouched, a silent monument to Victoria's courage and foresight. It became Megan's private retreat, a place to connect with the past while planning for the future. As winter gave way to spring, the grounds of Westwood Manor began to reveal their potential. Jack brought in a landscape architect who specialized in historical garden restoration. Old pathways were uncovered, the fountain repaired, and the rose garden, site of the hidden key, was carefully replanted with heritage varieties that would have been present in Victoria's time. Despite these positive developments, the shadow of James Blackwood remained. Though he had ceased direct legal action, Megan often spotted unfamiliar vehicles parked at a distance watching the house. Jack confirmed her suspicions that they were being monitored. More concerning were the small acts of sabotage that began to occur. Tools disappearing from work sites, deliveries of renovation materials mysteriously canceled, and once a small fire that started in a pile of construction debris but was quickly extinguished. None could be directly traced to Blackwood, but the pattern was unmistakable. The tension between maintaining vigilance and creating a normal life for Sophie wore on Megan. Jack's presence was reassuring. He had taken up semi-permanent residence in the caretaker's cottage on the property, ostensibly to oversee the renovations, but primarily to provide security. Their relationship had deepened into something neither of them had anticipated, a partnership built on shared purpose and growing affection, though both were cautious about defining it further. One evening, as Megan sorted through Victoria's correspondence in the secret study, she discovered a letter she had previously overlooked. It was from Thomas Sterling, dated just weeks before Victoria's disappearance, and its contents sent a chill down her spine. Sterling, apparently Victoria's secret lover and the father of her unborn child, had been investigating Edwin Blackwood's business practices. He had uncovered evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and even suspected murder, crimes that would have destroyed Blackwood if exposed. The letter warned Victoria that Sterling believed his investigation had been discovered. If anything happened to him, she should take the evidence he had compiled and flee. The evidence itself wasn't mentioned specifically, but the letter referred to the documents in the red leather portfolio. Megan searched the secret room again, again, but found no red portfolio. Had Victoria taken it when she disappeared? Had it been discovered in the intervening years? Or was it still hidden somewhere in the vast mansion, another secret waiting to be uncovered? She shared her discovery with Jack, who suggested they search the house methodically, focusing on places a pregnant woman fleeing for her life might have considered accessible yet secure. The search yielded nothing, but it added another dimension to the century-old conflict between the families. Not just a dispute over wealth, but potentially a cover-up of serious crimes. As spring bloomed fully, the renovation of Westwood Manor neared completion. What had once been a decaying shell was now a breathtaking example of restored historical architecture, its grandeur reclaimed while incorporating modern conveniences. Megan had been careful to balance restoration with livability, creating a home rather than a museum. The final touches were being added to the ballroom. Once a dusty, echoing space, now restored with gleaming hardwood floors, crystal chandeliers, and tall windows that flooded the room with natural light. Megan envisioned hosting community events there, opening the house that had been closed for so long to new life and celebration. The night before the last of the construction crew was scheduled to leave, Megan was awakened by the acrid smell of smoke. Her eyes flew open to darkness filled with choking haze. Fire! She leapt from bed, heart pounding, and raced to Sophie's room across the hall. Smoke was thicker there, billowing beneath the closed door. Megan covered her mouth with her nightgown, crouching low as she pushed the door open. Sophie was sitting up in bed, coughing and frightened. "There's fire, Mommy." The hallways burning, Megan gathered Sophie into her arms, mind racing through evacuation routes. The main staircase would be their normal exit, but the smoke was pouring from that direction. The back servants' stairs were on the opposite side of the wing, requiring them to move toward the apparent source of the fire. "We need to go out the window, sweetie." Megan's voice remained steady despite her terror. "Remember how we practiced?" They had indeed practiced emergency exits, Megan's homeless experiences making her hyper-aware of safety precautions. Sophie nodded, clinging to her mother as they moved to the window. Outside, flames were visible, licking up the side of the house near the main entrance. Below Sophie's window was a section of roof that extended over the conservatory, a potential pathway to a safer descent. Megan opened the window, helping Sophie climb out onto the roof. The cool night air provided momentary relief from the thickening smoke, but the crackle of flames grew louder. Halfway across the roof section, a large figure appeared at the edge. Jack, his face illuminated by the distant flames, eyes wild with concern. He had been patrolling the grounds and spotted the fire. Here Jack stretched his arms upward. "Jump down to me, Sophie. I'll catch you." Sophie hesitated, looking back at Megan with fear. Megan nodded encouragingly, helping position her daughter at the edge. The distance to Jack's outstretched arms was about 6 feet, manageable for a controlled drop, but terrifying in the chaos of the moment. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut and jumped. Jack caught her securely, immediately setting her down and reaching back up toward Megan. The fire was spreading rapidly, flames now visible through Sophie's bedroom window. As Megan prepared to jump, a thunderous crash from inside the house indicated a structural collapse, likely part of the main staircase. The roof beneath her shuttered, tiles shifting ominously. She locked eyes with Jack, saw the fear there, and knew she had to move immediately. She jumped, Jack's strong hands catching her wrists, guiding her safely down. The three of them moved quickly away from the house as flames engulfed more of the structure. In the distance, sirens wailed. Someone had called the fire department, but Megan knew they were too far from town for a quick response. Through tears of shock and grief, Megan watched as the home she had so painstakingly restored began to burn. The newly installed roof, the freshly painted walls, the carefully selected furnishings, all succumbing to hungry flames that lit the night sky with cruel brilliance. Neighbors began to arrive, drawn by the commotion and the ominous glow. Someone brought blankets for Megan and Sophie, who were shivering in their nightclothes despite the heat of the blaze. Jack spoke with the first responders, his face grim with suspicion. When he returned to Megan's side, his voice was low, meant for her ears alone. "This wasn't an accident. I found evidence of accelerant at multiple points of origin. Someone wanted to make sure the house couldn't be saved." Blackwood. The name hung unspoken between them, unnecessary to voice aloud. Who else would benefit from Westwood Manor's destruction? Who else had the motivation, the resources, the utter disregard for their lives? By dawn, the fire was finally contained, but the damage was catastrophic. The entire east wing, including the main entrance, grand staircase, and several bedrooms, was destroyed. The west wing, which included the kitchen and Jack's apartments, suffered severe smoke and water damage, but remained structurally intact. The ballroom, so nearly completed, was now a charred skeleton of its former grandeur. As Megan stood exhausted, soot-streaked, and heartbroken, before the smoking ruins, a sleek black car pulled up to the edge of the property. James Blackwood emerged immaculately dressed despite the early hours, surveying the destruction with poorly concealed satisfaction. "What a terrible tragedy, Ms. Walker." His voice dripped with false sympathy as he approached, staying just beyond the police line. "Such a historic property lost forever. I understand these old houses can be veritable tinderboxes. All that aged wood, outdated wiring." Jack moved protectively closer to Megan and Sophie, his body tense with barely controlled rage. "This wasn't an accident, Blackwood. The police have already found evidence of arson." Blackwood's expression remained unperturbed, though something cold flickered in his eyes. "A serious allegation, Mr. Reynolds. I hope they find whoever is responsible." He turned his attention back to Megan. "I imagine this changes your plans considerably." "My offer to purchase what remains of the property still stands, though naturally, given the circumstances, at a reduced rate." The audacity of it, standing before the still smoking ruins of her home, her family's legacy, and making a business proposition, ignited something fierce within Megan. "Get off my property, Mr. Blackwood. Now!" Blackwood appeared momentarily startled by her vehemence. He recovered quickly, straightening his already impeccable tie. "Consider my offer, Ms. Walker. You've lost nearly everything. Starting over would be challenging, especially for a single mother with limited resources." "I said leave." Megan's voice cut like steel, Sophie clutching her hand tightly. Something in her tone must have convinced Blackwood further provocation would be unwise. He inclined his head slightly, a mocking semblance of respect. "As you wish. My card should you reconsider." He placed a business card on the hood of a nearby police car, then returned to his vehicle, departing with the same calculated composure with which he had arrived. Once Blackwood was gone, Megan's strength finally faltered. She sank onto a fallen tree trunk, pulling Sophie close, tears streaming freely down her face. Jack sat beside them, his arm providing solid support around Megan's shoulders. "We lost everything," she whispered, the magnitude of the destruction overwhelming her. "All that work, all that history." "Not everything." Jack's voice was firm, grounding. "The secret room is in the west wing below ground level. It's likely intact. And the second hiding place, it's in the stone fireplace, which would have withstood the fire." Megan looked up, hope flickering through her despair. "Victoria's journal, the family records. We'll know once they let us back in to assess the damage." Jack's eyes held steady on hers. "But Megan, even if every physical thing was lost, you've still won the most important battle. The court recognized your claim. Your connection to Victoria is established legal fact now. Blackwood can burn the house, but he can't erase your birthright." The investigation into the fire moved quickly. Evidence of arson was indisputable. Accelerants had been placed at strategic points throughout the east wing, with separate ignition devices ensuring multiple points of origin. Security camera footage from the property's perimeter, installed by Jack as a precaution, had captured images of two men in dark clothing approaching the house around midnight. Their faces were obscured, but the footage clearly showed them carrying containers consistent with those found at the fire scene. The connection to Blackwood, however, remained circumstantial. The arsonists had been professionals, leaving minimal evidence beyond what was necessary to determine the cause. No fingerprints, no DNA, no traceable accelerants, nothing that would lead definitively back to Blackwood Enterprises or its CEO. 3 days after the fire, once structural engineers had declared the remaining portions of the house safe to enter, Megan and Jack made their way through the devastation. The smell of wet ash and smoke permeated everything. Sodden debris crunched underfoot. Walls stood partially collapsed, revealing the skeleton of the once grand manor. The west wing had survived, though, with significant damage. The kitchen, where they had shared so many meals, was water-damaged but salvageable. Sophie's playroom would need complete renovation. The secret passage, as Jack had predicted, remained intact, protected by its stone construction and below-ground location. When Megan opened the hidden door, relief washed over her. The secret study appeared untouched, preserved in its underground sanctuary. Victoria's journal lay where Megan had left it on the desk. The safe, though she had emptied most of its contents to the second hiding place, still stood secure in the wall. Most important, she thought, was that through the destruction, through the loss, the core of Victoria's legacy remained. The physical house could be rebuilt, but the connection to the past, the proof of lineage, the family history, these irreplaceable elements had survived. The second hiding place in the stone fireplace of what had been Victoria's mother's sitting room was more difficult to assess. That room was on the border between the destroyed and surviving sections of the house. When they finally located it amid the debris, the fireplace itself appeared intact, but the surrounding structure had partially collapsed, making access dangerous. Working carefully, Jack shored up the unstable sections, creating a safe path to the hearth. The stone panel that concealed the hiding spot was sooty but undamaged. Megan's hands trembled as she pressed the release mechanism, praying the internal cavity had remained sealed against smoke and water. The panel slid open, revealing the wooden box exactly as she had left it. Inside, the rare books showed no damage. The diamonds glittered, unmoved by the calamity that had transformed the world outside their stone sanctuary. The locket containing the miniature portrait, possibly the only image of Victoria's mother, remained perfect in its delicate beauty. Standing amid the ruins, clutching these preserved treasures, Megan felt a surge of defiance. Blackwood had tried to destroy her home, perhaps even to harm her family, but he had failed in his ultimate goal. Westwood Manor was damaged, not defeated. The Lancaster legacy would continue. In the weeks that followed, Megan faced difficult decisions. Insurance would cover some of the rebuilding costs, but the historical nature of the property complicated matters. Complete restoration to its original state would be astronomically expensive and time-consuming. Sophie needed stability, not another year of construction zones and temporary accommodations. They stayed initially with Martha Simmons, who had opened her home to them without hesitation. The elderly woman's cottage was small but comfortable, and her genuine concern for their well-being provided emotional support when Megan needed it most. Sophie, resilient as children often are, treated the situation as an adventure, though she asked daily when they could return to their castle. Jack visited regularly, dividing his time between securing what remained of Westwood Manor and helping Megan navigate the labyrinth of insurance claims, historical preservation requirements, and reconstruction options. His steady presence became her anchor in the chaos of displacement and uncertainty. William Carson continued his legal support, now focused on building a case against Blackwood for the arson. Without direct evidence, however, prosecution remained unlikely. Carson advised patients, suggesting they focus on rebuilding, while he quietly gathered information on Blackwood's business dealings, searching for vulnerabilities that might provide leverage. One afternoon, as Megan sat at Martha's kitchen table reviewing architectural proposals for rebuilding, she found herself staring at Victoria's journal, open to an entry she had read dozens of times before. Something in the phrasing suddenly struck her differently. Mother always said a house is more than its walls and roof. It is the purpose that fills it, the lives it shelters, the dreams it nurtures. If these walls should fall, the spirit of home remains wherever we create it anew. Victoria had written this after her father's death, contemplating the uncertain future of the Lancaster estate as economic clouds gathered. Now, nearly a century later, her words seem prophetic, speaking directly to Megan's current dilemma. A house is more than its walls and roof. The phrase echoed in Megan's mind, sparking an idea that grew clearer with each passing moment. She had been so focused on recreating what was lost, restoring the historical mansion exactly as it had been, that she had lost sight of what truly mattered. When Jack arrived that evening, Megan was surrounded by sketches and notes, her eyes bright with renewed purpose. "I've been thinking about this all wrong," she explained, spreading her ideas before him. "We don't need to rebuild Westwood Manor exactly as it was. We need to honor its spirit while creating something new, something that serves a purpose beyond just being our home." Jack studied her sketches, his expression thoughtful. "What are you proposing? A center for women and children in transition? Single mothers like I was, families displaced by domestic violence or economic hardship?" Megan's voice grew stronger as she outlined her vision. "We'd rebuild using the original footprint, keeping the historical elements that survived, but redesign the interior to include private apartments, communal spaces, a daycare center job, training facilities. Everything I wished for when Sophie and I were homeless." The more she explained, the more right it felt. Using Victoria's fortune not just to restore a house, but to create a refuge that would help others regain control of their lives, just as Meghan had done. It would be a living legacy honoring Victoria's courage and foresight in a way that transcended mere physical restoration. Jack's slow smile told her everything before he spoke. Victoria would approve completely. The Blackwoods wanted the Lancaster fortune for personal gain, using it instead to help others. That's the perfect response. Meghan contacted William Carson the next day, outlining her plans to establish the Victoria Lancaster Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing transitional housing and support services for women and children in need. The remaining west wing of Westwood Manor would be restored as the foundation's headquarters and community spaces, while new construction would create the residential facilities. Carson embraced the idea enthusiastically, helping navigate the legal requirements for establishing a nonprofit and ensuring the historical preservation covenants would accommodate the new purpose. He also suggested bringing in a development consultant who specialized in adaptive reuse of historical properties for community benefit. The architectural plans evolved over several meetings, combining historical preservation with modern functionality. The surviving grand ballroom would become a multi-purpose space for community events, educational programs, and job fairs. The kitchen would expand to include teaching facilities where residents could learn culinary skills. New construction would blend sympathetically with the historical elements, creating a harmonious whole that honored the past while serving present needs. Throughout the planning process, Sophie remained Meghan's touchstone, reminding her why this work mattered. Each decision was filtered through the lens of her daughter's experience. What would have helped them during their time of greatest need? What would have eased their transition from homelessness to stability? The answers shaped the practical details of the project, ensuring it would truly serve those it aimed to help. Jack's role evolved as well. Initially focused on security and construction oversight, he became increasingly invested in the foundation's mission. His military experience had shown him the importance of stable communities, while his own father's struggle as a single parent after his mother's death gave him personal insight into the challenges the center would address. Meghan's relationship with Jack deepened amid the shared purpose and vision. What had begun as cautious cooperation had grown into partnership, then friendship, and now something neither of them had expected to find. The easy domesticity they had established at Westwood Manor continued in their temporary quarters, Jack spending more evenings with them than at his own apartment, becoming a fixture in Sophie's life as well as Meghan's. 3 months after the fire, with plans finalized and permits secured, the groundbreaking ceremony for the Victoria Lancaster Center for Women and Families attracted considerable local attention. The story of Westwood Manor, the century-old mystery of Victoria's disappearance, the court battle with Blackwood, and the devastating fire had captured public imagination. The transformation of this tragedy into a community resource added a compelling new chapter. Local media covered the event, interviewing Meghan about her vision for the center. She spoke eloquently about her own experience with homelessness, her unexpected discovery of her connection to Victoria Lancaster, and her desire to create something meaningful from the ashes of destruction. Throughout the day, people congratulated her, praised her vision, and offered support for the project. Volunteer sign-up sheets filled quickly. Local businesses pledged donations of materials and services. The community that had initially viewed her with suspicion now embraced her mission with enthusiasm. Amid the celebration, Meghan noticed a frail, elderly woman watching from a distance, leaning heavily on a cane. There was something familiar about her, bearing the tilt of her head, the careful way she observed the proceedings without participating. When their eyes met across the crowd, the woman nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that seemed laden with meaning. Later, as the crowd thinned, the woman approached Meghan directly. Her movements were slow but purposeful, her eyes sharp despite her advanced age. "I'm Isabel Harrison. I knew your grandmother, Elizabeth." Meghan's heart skipped a beat. "You knew my grandmother?" Isabel smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "Very well indeed. My mother was Victoria's closest friend, the one who helped her escape when her life was threatened. She assisted in the arrangements for baby Elizabeth's care after Victoria had to disappear." The revelation struck Meghan like a physical blow. "You know what happened to Victoria? What really happened?" Isabel glanced around, ensuring they weren't overheard. "Not here, too many ears. But I have something for you, something Victoria wanted her daughter to have someday. something I've kept safe all these years waiting for the right moment. From her handbag, Isabel withdrew a small package wrapped in aging tissue paper. It contained a photograph, a portrait of an elderly woman with striking eyes that Megan immediately recognized despite the passage of time. Victoria Lancaster, perhaps in her 70s, her face lined but still beautiful, her expression serene. She lived, Megan whispered, staring at the photographic evidence that rewrote the ending of the story she thought she knew. Isabel nodded, in quiet obscurity under a different name in a small town hundreds of miles from here. She lived a full life, though not the one she was born to. She never stopped thinking about the daughter she had to leave behind. The back of the photograph bore a handwritten message. For my daughter and her children, may they find what I had to leave behind. A house is not a home. Home is carried in the heart. Tears welled in Megan's eyes as she traced the familiar handwriting, the same hand that had penned the journal entries she had read so often. Victoria had survived, had lived to old age, had thought of her descendants. Isabel pressed a small card into Megan's hand. My address. Come visit when you are ready to hear the whole story. It's time the truth was known, at least within the family. As Isabel departed, moving slowly through the crowd, Jack approached, concern evident in his expression. Who was that? Megan held up the photograph, her voice unsteady with emotion. Victoria. She lived, Jack. All these years we thought she vanished completely, but she escaped. She survived. Jack studied the photograph, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding. She would have had to disappear completely to escape Blackwood, to protect her child, her fortune, everything she valued. The discovery added new dimension to Megan's understanding of her great-grandmother. Not just a victim who had vanished, but a survivor who had sacrificed her identity and privilege to protect what mattered most. It reinforced her conviction that the Victoria Lancaster Center was the right path forward, honoring Victoria's legacy of protection and sanctuary. Construction began the following week, the site quickly transforming from ruins to renewal. The surviving West Wing was carefully restored, while new foundations were laid where the East Wing had stood. Jack oversaw the work with meticulous attention to detail, ensuring both historical accuracy in the restoration and modern efficiency in the new construction. Megan divided her time between project management, foundation development, and creating a stable environment for Sophie amid the ongoing changes. They moved into a small cottage on the property close enough to oversee the work, but removed from the construction zone, a temporary home while their permanent one took shape. As summer faded into autumn, the center's main structure was completed. The restored West Wing gleamed with fresh paint and repaired woodwork, while the new East Wing rose in sympathetic harmony with the historical elements, modern in function, but respectful in aesthetic. The heart of the project, the original secret study, remained unchanged, preserved as a small museum dedicated to Victoria's story. Her journal, now digitized for preservation, was displayed alongside artifacts from the Lancaster family and educational materials about the economic challenges of the 1920s that had shaped Victoria's decisions. It would serve as a reminder of the center's origins and inspiration. Throughout the construction process, Blackwood remained ominously silent. No further legal challenges emerged. No suspicious incidents disrupted the work. The absence of interference was almost more unsettling than active opposition would have been, as if he were simply biding his time, waiting for a more opportune moment to strike. Megan's visit to Isabel Harrison revealed the full story of Victoria's escape and subsequent life. Fearing for her safety and that of her unborn child after Thomas Sterling's mysterious death, Victoria had staged her own disappearance with the help of Isabel's mother. She had taken only a small portion of the Lancaster fortune, enough to establish a modest new life under the name Victoria Miller, in a small town in the Pacific Northwest. She had entrusted her daughter Elizabeth to Thomas's sister Margaret, a kind but distant woman who raised the child without revealing her true parentage. Victoria had watched from afar as her daughter grew married and had children of her own, never revealing herself for fear that Blackwood's reach might extend to her family. The red leather portfolio that Thomas Sterling had mentioned in his letter, containing evidence of Edwin Blackwood's crimes, had been sent to federal authorities shortly before Victoria's disappearance. An investigation had been opened, but without Victoria's testimony, it had eventually stalled. Edwin Blackwood had been questioned, but never charged, allowing him to continue building the family empire that James now controlled. Isabel also revealed that Victoria had maintained contact with the Reynolds family. Jack's grandfather and father had been her lifeline to news of Westwood Manor and the Lancaster legacy she had been forced to abandon. They had faithfully maintained their vigil over the property awaiting the return of a true Lancaster heir, just as Jack had continued after them. The revelation of this multi-generational connection deepened Megan's appreciation for Jack's dedication to the house and its legacy. What she had initially perceived as professional curiosity or neighborly concern was in fact the fulfillment of a promise that spanned nearly a century, a promise now completed with her return and Sophie's. As the Victoria Lancaster Center neared completion, Megan and Jack worked with social service agencies to develop the application process and support programs for future residents. They hired staff, social workers, child care providers, job counselors, and administrative support, creating a comprehensive support system for women and families in transition. The grand opening was scheduled for spring, a symbolic new beginning after the destruction of the previous year. Invitations went out to community leaders, donors, volunteers, and service providers who would partner with the center. Local media planned coverage interested in the transformation of the historic property and its new purpose. 1 week before the opening, Megan received an unexpected visitor at the construction site. A young man in an expensive suit introduced himself as Thomas Blackwood, James Blackwood's son and heir apparent to Blackwood Enterprises. Unlike his father's cold arrogance, Thomas exhibited a nervous energy, glancing frequently over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. "I need to speak with you privately, Ms. Walker. It's about my father and Victoria Lancaster." Suspicious but curious, Megan agreed to talk with him in her office, ensuring Jack was nearby. Thomas's resemblance to his father was strong, but his demeanor couldn't have been more different. Where James projected calculating control, Thomas seemed burdened, conflicted. "My father is planning something for your opening day." Thomas spoke in hushed tones, tension evident in every line of his body. "He's obsessed with this property, with the Lancaster fortune. The court ruling, the fire, this center. Each has been a public humiliation he can't accept." "What kind of something?" Megan kept her voice steady despite the chill his words sent through her. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "I don't know the details. He doesn't trust me with those anymore. Not since I questioned some of his business practices. But I overheard him on the phone. He mentioned the opening said it would be the final resolution of the Lancaster problem. Why are you telling me this?" Megan studied him carefully, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. "Because I found something in my grandfather's papers." Thomas reached into his jacket, withdrawing a yellowed envelope. Letters between Edwin Blackwood and the man he hired to kill Thomas Sterling in 1929. Planning documents for forcing Victoria to sign over her assets before she disappeared. "My family built their fortune on murder and theft. I can't be part of that legacy anymore." The envelope contained the evidence Victoria and Thomas Sterling had sought nearly a century earlier. Proof of Edwin Blackwood's crimes passed down through generations, preserved by the very family it incriminated. With these documents, Megan could potentially bring down Blackwood Enterprises, entirely exposing not just historical crimes, but the continuity of corruption that James Blackwood had maintained. "I don't want my father's empire," Thomas explained, his voice steadying with resolve. "I want to make amends somehow for what my family has done to yours." Megan's world shifted once again, perspectives realigning with this new information. The possibility of true justice for Victoria, for Thomas Sterling, for all that had been stolen and destroyed over the decades, suddenly became tangible. The opening of the Victoria Lancaster Center would indeed be a final resolution, though not the one James Blackwood envisioned. With Thomas's evidence, William Carson's legal expertise, and the public platform the opening would provide, Megan could finally end the century-long shadow the Blackwood family had cast over the Lancaster legacy. As Thomas departed, extracting a promise that his role in providing the evidence would remain confidential until necessary, Megan looked out over the nearly completed center. Workers were installing the sign above the main entrance, a stylized image of a rose in bloom, echoing the garden where Victoria had hidden her key, with the words, "Victoria Lancaster Center for Women and Families," elegantly inscribed beneath. From homelessness to homecoming, from loss to legacy, the journey had come full circle. Whatever Blackwood planned, whatever challenges still lay ahead, Megan faced them not as a desperate single mother with $1 to her name, but as Victoria Lancaster's heir in the truest sense, a protector of family, a builder of sanctuary, a creator of home that transcended mere walls and roof. The dollar that had purchased Westwood Manor had been just the beginning. The real value lay in what Megan had discovered within its walls, her history, her purpose, and a future built on the foundations of the past, but reaching towards something entirely new.